Recording, and welcome to part 3 of our What's New in version 2.60 webinar. So the first thing we're going to talk about in part 3 is the enhancements to visitor management. It's being called phase 3 internally. So there's a couple of things going on here. One is that they're consolidating the email and web settings on one tab in Personnel. And I've shown you that already, but we'll go back over it again. They're adding a new Kiosk application that can be used to self-check-in visitors. So the idea here is that this is an application that would run on an iPad-type device, an iOS device. That could be set up on a kiosk-type stand at the entry to a facility, and visitors can come in and use that device to register and check in for their visits. So in order to do that, we've added a check-in site object. So that would define the options that appear on the Kiosk application. And another thing that has been added to visitor management is the ability to define visit user-defined fields that can be added to a visit site and are visible in the visitor management application as additional fields. And again, if you guys have questions at any time, you can just pipe up, or there's a question pane that you can type into in the GoToWebinar app. So we talked a little about this before. Hang on, I get a phone call. All right, sorry about that interruption. You get a call from your boss and you might want to answer it. Visitor management, user-defined fields. So as you can see on the screen, you can define object type visit is a new type of user-defined field. And again, I showed you this before, but we'll talk a little bit about it in relation to visits. So it's visible on the visit site as an additional field, and it shows in the visitor management screens on the application. So here's an example. This is a visit that somebody is scheduling, and the visit UDF is available. You can have multiple visit UDFs. You create the visit UDFs in the user-defined fields editor, and then you have to add them to the visit site. So you could have one visit site that has 2 UDFs. You could have another visit site that has 1, another that has 3. So you're not limited in that way. You create them in the database, but then they can become particular to a given visit site. Now, the Kiosk application. So like I said, it's considered a walk-up type of application, so that visitors can look up their visit appointment and complete their arrival, registration, or check-in. They can enter data, they can scan an ID, and etc. Some of the functions are not there yet, but they're expecting to, incrementally improve this application once we've put it out there. One thing you can do now is you can have the person take a picture, a selfie essentially, and then, for example, they could print a temporary badge. Now, so this is connected with the enhanced visitor management option, license option. And so This will give you support for the visitor management kiosk, and it's going to be licensed on a per-seat basis. We're going to include one kiosk connection with the enhanced visitor management option, and customers can purchase additional connections as needed. And the kiosk is going to be downloadable from the Apple Store, and I think it will be available from the Software House website too, but I think that's still, that's in the planning stages. So to support that, we've created an object called the check-in site. And what this does is it allows you to configure the rules and the display messages for the kiosk application. So it's got two tabs. It's got a general tab and it's got a messages tab. Let me go back a minute. Because I don't have a separate slide about the messages tab. So if you look at this, you can see that you can type in a welcome message, but there is a default welcome message. Please touch the button to begin. So each one of these has a default message that you can customize to meet the needs of your own site, your own kiosk. The general tab lets you configure the name, description, and image of the checkout site. Check-in site, sorry. It also allows you to specify if you're identifying visitors by email address or name, and then you can set some data collection options. You can optionally set it to ask the visitor to take a picture. You can set it for automatic check-in, and you can also set it to accept unregistered visitors. So if somebody comes up and you can't find them, the kiosk can't find them in the list of visitors, they can still be accepted. And you can also enter a document here that the visitor has to read and accept. And so the example would be a non-disclosure agreement, but it really could be anything. So that's another thing that the kiosk can present to the visitor. So now we're going to take a look at the basic kiosk app and how it appears. So the idea here is that a secure operator will log on to activate the kiosk. So this is the first screen that you would see, and you'd use your username and your password that you would use to get into the secure applications in order to log in here. The second thing is that to align the camera and make sure the camera is working correctly, it asks the operator to take a picture and then continue. So you can, most of the time I think the kiosk is going to be in a set location, like on a stand of some sort. So this way the operator can check and make sure that that it's aimed correctly and that they can take a self-picture. Fortunately, the visitors don't have to look at that picture. After you've logged the app on, the welcome screen is presented. So again, you can see this is the default message. Please touch the screen to begin. So the visitor taps the screen to check in. And when the visitor taps, they're asked to choose a visit site. So your site can have multiple visit sites being served by the one kiosk. In this case, we've only got one. So they would tap that icon, that message, in order to select a visit site. Then they're asked to identify themselves. So at that point, they can type in their name, or they could type in an email address if an email address was selected on the check-in site for the means of identification. When the visitor taps the field, they're going to get a keypad so that they can continue and type. And then once they've finished, they can click continue, and the application will search for their name to see if they have a visit that day. If there isn't a visit, they're going to get a sorry message, and they can retry, say, change their name, try last name first. If they made a mistake and were supposed to type in their email, they could go back and retry, or they can quit. And again, if they accept unregistered visitors, they should be able to continue. That's if that option was chosen on the check-in site. And if a visit is found, the visitor is asked to take their picture and then click continue. So look into the camera and take a picture. It doesn't tell them to smile, but it probably should. And then a message appears confirming that they're registered and giving information about the visit. And then the visitor can click finish to return the app to the welcome screen. So it's fairly simple. Any questions on that? Okay, then we'll move on to the new web application that's going to be part of 260. And this is called Access Management. And what it does is it provides a mechanism or a process for granting clearances to personnel. And we'll talk about what that means, because this could be a fairly big change for someone, for an organization. It could give them a good orderly process for doing this, but on the other hand, it can also, there are also some adjustments to the way that you configure clearances that might mean some changes for them. So it's a licensable option, and it includes administrative components, two new objects, the access site and the access request. And it also includes two web portal applications. There's an access requester app that allows personnel, designated personnel, to initiate a formal process for obtaining clearances. And there's an access approver, and that allows people who have this approver role to approve, deny, or revoke requests for clearances. So selected personnel can be designated as requesters and or approvers. The only limitation to that is if you're a requester and you make a request, then you can't be the same person who approves it. And in addition to that, this is a new feature, doors can be configured so that they automatically initiate an access request to assign a clearance when a card is rejected for clearance at the door. Okay, and we'll get into more detail on each of these things. There's a license count added to the About box, and that's access management, requesters, and approvers right here. So you can see in this instance, this license has the ability to define 5 requesters or approvers, and it currently has 2. 2 default license seats come with the license, and you can purchase more. Typically what you do is assign 1 person to the requester role and 1 person to the approver for those 2 licenses. Okay? Now the license count, the way that's set up is if you have used up all of your licenses, so if that said 5 of 5, by assigning people to either one of these roles, and you try to assign a sixth person, the system won't allow it. It doesn't give you an error message. What it essentially does is it protects those two fields so that you can't add another person. Okay. Now, we went over this before, but I'll briefly recount this. There are two system variables related to access management. The first one is how long does a pending request, a not approved request, stay in the system as pending before getting canceled. So the default is 14 days. So a requester makes a request, it's pending in the system, an approver does not approve it, and 14 days passes, that request is going to be canceled. You can also set an expiration date for access requests. So you can say, I'm requesting a clearance for these people for 2 weeks. And so that has an expiration date. And you can use this system variable to set that request status from approved to soon to expire, so that you can give people a couple of days notice before the request expires. And at that point, it's going to show up on the access requesters and approvers application, and they could choose to extend the request. Okay. So again, we talked about the licensing. This is per seat. It's not a concurrent license. So if you set up 2 people as approvers and you only have 2 seats, set up 2 people as requesters, you only have 2 seats, nobody can do approvals. Or if you set 2 people up as approvers and no requesters, they're not going to be very busy. So, and customers will be able to produce additional, purchase additional seats. So the way this is counted is on the Web and Email tab in Personnel, the license, there are 2 fields called Can Submit Requests and Can Approve Requests. And the license counts the number of personnel records that have either one of these checked. So again, if you select both of them on one personnel record, that counts as 2 seats. So again, typically with the 2 seats that come with the license, typically you're going to have 1 person as a requester, 1 person as an approver. So the idea of the requester is, let's say that you have a person who manages personnel, or is kind of a resource manager for your facility. They would be the person who would make these formal requests for clearances. In some cases they'd be doing it organizationally, so they'd say, all right, I've got a group of 5 people who work in the engineering lab, and I want them all to have clearance to the engineering lab. Or it could be a case where an employee calls them up and says, hey, I need to be able to access the lab to work with, Jack for 2 weeks. And so they would send in a clearance request with an expiration. And what happens is, if you are at the limit, 5 of 5 or 2 of 2, and you attempt to add another person, it's not really an error. What it does is it protects the field so that you can't add another person. Okay, the new object, one of the new objects related to this is an access request site. So this is what the requesters are going to see when they open the application and log in. They're going to be presented with the access request sites that they have the rights to
Hey Matt, just a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Does that mean that what you're saying by being a requester, when you look at this particular section of the site, so if you want to have multiple kiosks, you need to have the licenses for requesters to have that site? So you had a 4 or 5, if you had a 4 or 5 kiosks.
This is not the kiosk. The kiosk is for visitor management. This is for access management. And you'll see in a few screens that there's a web application, web portal that allows you access to visitor management, access request, and access approve. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's separate from the kiosk. The kiosk is something that is set up, say, in the lobby of your building, so that when someone comes in to visit, they don't have to necessarily bug the receptionist. They can go up to the kiosk and enter their information there. So it kind of automates that process so that you don't have the receptionist have to focus on that person and try to find them in the system and take their picture and all that kind of stuff. Okay?
Yeah.
These are two separate things.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. So anyway, back to the request site. So what I think I'll do is I'll talk a little about the screen, and then I'll show you how it shows up in the application. So what this allows you to do is to set up the site so that you can give requesters the ability to assign clearances, and you specify each requester. You can specify which clearances they can assign. So it's not every clearance in the system. It's only the ones that you specify. And you can also specify what personnel they are allowed to request clearances for. Okay? On this general tab, the things you're setting up are what are the personnel fields that are going to be displayed for the personnel in the request that are being asked to be granted clearances, and then those user-defined fields, the additional fields that can show up on the access request. So as you can see in this example over here, this has 3 user-defined fields defined. Okay, and you know, they're not the best in the world. Yes or no is kind of a silly one, but again, those are going to show up on the application, along with in the personnel listing, the first name, last name, email, and then a logical customer field. Okay. So again, here's the example. You have these 3 user-defined fields, and they're going to show up on the application under additional details. Okay, so in this case, there's only one showing. Okay. On the Requester tab, you can set up the list of requesters for the site. You have some options. You can allow all requesters in the system. You can allow all requesters that are in the same partition as the access site. Or you can create a custom selection list. And that can combine individual requesters or all requesters from one or more partitions. So when you, as you can see, there's an individual, and then there's a partition named. And when you click Add, you're going to get a pop-up field that is going to show you the choices that you have. Okay. On the Clearances tab, again, you've got this set of choices where you can say all clearances in the system, all clearances in the same partition as the site, or a custom selection list which can combine individual clearances or all clearances from a given partition. Okay, if you had 8 partitions, you could click Add twice and add 2 of those partitions, just for example. And on the Personnel tab, again, same kinds of choices. All persons in the system, all personnel in the same partition, a custom selection list of personnel or partitions, and there's one additional one. You can set this up to allow just the requester. So the only person that the requester can request clearances for is themselves. That's, at this point, that's fairly unlikely, I think. I think most of our customers are going to be looking to have one person, say a manager of some sort, be able to assign clearances, or to not assign, request clearances for multiple individuals. Okay. Now, another thing you can set up is an auto request at an iStar door. Now, there used to be a tab called Visitor Management on the iStar door. That tab has been changed to be called Special Actions. And one of the actions you can do is set it up so that on a schedule and in a particular direction, in or out, if a person approaches that door, swipes, and is rejected for clearance, you can set it up so that a clearance request for that person is automatically entered. Okay? And then what happens depends upon how the clearances are configured, and we'll get into the options for configuring the clearances. But again, you wouldn't do this for just any door. You would probably have a general type of door that was used, assigned to most employees, and so if you wanted to set this up so that a clearance request was sent in and then automatically approved, you're probably not going to do that with an outside door on an always schedule. That wouldn't make sense. That would mean essentially anybody could get in the second time they swiped. So you'd want to do this fairly selectively. Now, we're going to go into the clearances and you'll see some of these options. So now there's an approval tab in the clearance editor. And what this does is it determines how a clearance is managed by Expiring. Okay, so you can set up a clearance for no approval needed. And what that means is the clearance can be assigned to personnel manually by an administrator, the same way we've always done it. If you set no approval needed, then this clearance can't be selected for the special action from a door. That doesn't make sense. In other words, to have a request put in on a reject, and if there's no approval needed, it's going to go straight through, and that doesn't make sense. You can select any approvers from partition. All right, I'm out of order here. Let's do this. Auto approve clearance. So if you set it for auto approve, if a door special request occurs, somebody's rejected at a door, the door creates a special request, and you've set this for auto approval, then that will automatically assign the clearance to the person who swipes to the door. And it will be registered in the system that an approval occurred. So again, all this stuff is journaled so that you can tell when somebody makes a request and when somebody approves a clearance request. So it's trackable. If the checkbox for only allow assignment via an approved request form is checked, that means that you can't assign this clearance manually anymore. Okay, so if we look back, when you have no approval needed, which is essentially a manual process, that is grayed out. And you know what? I'm noticing that this is an old screen, so I got to replace that screen. So it looks like this, but it's grayed out. So only allow assignment via an approved request form. If a requester creates an access request for the site, when it's set to auto approval, the request is automatically approved and it doesn't go into the approval app for approval. Okay, so you're only going to set this for doors that pretty much everybody needs to access. If you select the approver rule for any selected approvers, you can designate specific approvers for this clearance, and you can designate a personnel group, which would be a group of approvers. You'd want to set it up that way. You can set a time limit for how long the request can remain active, and this is separate from the system variable. So, you know, if you only wanted requests for this clearance to be able to be active for a week, you could set that maximum length. And again, you can use this setting for specifying that this clearance can only be assigned via an access request and only approved by that. So nobody can manually assign this clearance. So that's a big change, that you could potentially have clearances that can't be assigned in the old way. That's what I was talking about, where it may change somebody's processes if they implement this. And if there's a door request, a special action request from the door for the clearance, it will be sent to the designated approvers and they must approve it before the clearance is assigned. Okay, again, this is the web and mobile tab in personnel, and what we're showing is the two new capabilities here, the two new selections for can approve request and can submit request. And like I said before, the license is counted. So if you've used up all your licenses and you try to assign someone to either one of these, then it's going to be protected and you will not be able to click the box. That's not true of can host visits, by the way. There isn't a per seat license on visitor management, so you don't have that same kind of limit on can host visits. Now you notice on the right-hand side there is a whole bunch of mobile phone options, and these are in 2.6, but the things that they work with are not available for 2.6 yet. So they're in there so that maybe shortly after 2.6 or in a 2.6 service pack that these capabilities can be added. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the applications themselves. So there's a web portal that existed for visitor management. It's now going to be used for potentially 3 applications. So a given person who logs in to this web portal is only going to see the applications that they have been checked for on this previous screen. So if all they've got is host visits, they're going to get visitor management. If all they've got is approve, then they're just going to see the approver app. If all they've got is submit request, then they're just going to see the requester app. Okay? So this is the general process for the requester and the approver. A requester logs into the portal, selects the requester application, and you won't see this screen if you've only got one app. Selects a request site, and then searches for existing requests or creates a new one. They can create a new request and save it, and then what will happen is the approver will get an email notification saying that they've got a pending request that they can approve. For the approver, they log into the portal, they select the approver app, and then they click on the access site, and they're going to find a list of pending requests, and also there's an audit tab that lists additional requests, ones that have already been approved, for example, and they can approve or reject, or they can revoke a request that was already approved. So if they had approved a request and then somebody from a higher position calls down and say, no, we don't want those people to be able to get into that lab this week, that request can be revoked. Or if a request is going to expire, they can renew it. And then when that action is taken, the requester will receive an email notification that the request has been approved. And then the clearance will be added to any of the personnel that were listed in the request. So that's the general portal web flow. So if you happen to be someone who has all three applications, this is what you'll see when you log onto the portal. So you can pick any one of these at a time. So again, there's the visitor management, access requester, and access approver. And also at any time, you can use this change app button, and you can go to one of the other applications if you have been granted access. So you're not stuck in that application and have to log out and then log back in. Okay? So once you've entered the request app, then you can choose an access site that you want to work with. So you pick one of those. Okay. Now, you're going to see a request list, and you can filter that by clicking Custom Filter. And one of the nice things about this filter box is that it shows you what all of the different symbols mean. So as you can see on this screen, lobby is in the draft status. Now that means that the requester has put in some of the information, but they haven't submitted it yet. They saved it, but they didn't submit it for approval. A pending request means a request that has been submitted for approval. Approved means approved. Active means that it's currently active and people are using it, and so on. Okay, so again, here are the various definitions. If something is soon to expire, it means it's been approved, but it's reaching an expiration date. If it has expired, that means it's no longer usable, but it could be renewed. Rejected means the approvers said thumbs down, no, you're not getting this. And revoked means that it was approved, but it has been revoked for one or more of the personnel. So the approver can, when revoking a request, can pick certain personnel to revoke. Okay, so to create a request, you click New Request, and then you can fill in a name So your access site is going to be filled in because you've already logged into that access site. You can put in a name for the request. You can hit this plus key and type in a clearance. Now, what will happen is as you begin to type, it's going to give you a list of potential clearances, and then you can pick one of them. You need to type in a justification. Note that there are asterisks here that mean required fields. So you need to type in some sort of a justification. And then you can click personnel, and you can add personnel to the request. You can click documents to attach a file. You know, say if you've got a new employee starting and you wanted to attach their letter announcing that they've joined the company, you could do that. And then you can click additional details, and that would show you the UDFs. Once you've put in the request, you can click submit if you want to submit the request so that it can be approved, or you can click the save icon, and that'll save the request as a draft. And once you've submitted it, it's going to appear in the list of requests that was on the left-hand side of the screen. If there's a request that has expired, as this one has, this button for renew will be active so that you could renew the request and have the approver approve the request. In that case, you'd end up changing the dates. And as you can see, so that request has been submitted and then it got approved. From the approver side, again, when you log in, you're going to pick an access site. And then you're going to see a list of the requests that you are eligible to approve or deny. So the approver can approve the request for all personnel, or they can reject the request for all personnel. That's a blanket choice. That you can't go into the list of personnel and pick and choose. Okay? If there's a request that is currently active, you can revoke that request so that those personnel no longer have those clearances. And a confirmation dialog appears so that you can confirm that you are revoking the request. Now, you can also what they call audit requests. So you can display requests by request name, or you can display the requests by clearance and person. An approver can list all pending requests for that approver. So this would be under the pending tab, not the audit tab. Now, we've mentioned the idea of having requests expire. You can configure requests, or you can configure clearances now to support expiration on individual personnel. Okay, so it doesn't. You always could have a clearance be active and expire for everybody, but now you can set it up so that a clearance can expire on a per person basis. Okay, so this is brand new in clearances. So this is for ultra doors and elevators that can support personalized activation and expiration on a per person basis. An expiring clearance can be configured on the Clearance General tab, and it allows a start and end date to be applied when assigning the clearance. So as you can see, this is the Clearance tab on Personnel, and you'll notice that this start and end date are now there. And so for this person, or for this clearance, if somebody assigns this clearance to a person, they'll be able to enter an expiration start and end date. They don't have to, but it's available. Now, again, this is the change that I talked about. Notice that clearances that are set up for auto approver, for any approver from partition or any selected approvers, they cannot be assigned directly. They can't be assigned manually, okay? They can only be assigned via an access request. Now, on the clearances, you can set up approvers on a per clearance basis. So you could actually, on this clearance, add a list of approvers that are the approvers for this clearance. Okay? So if you set up a clearance for auto approval, that means that if a request is put in, it's automatically approved, and there doesn't need to be a separate approver to approve the request. And you can create what we're calling a friendly name, so that you can set up a name that will be shown in the portal so that it's a little bit clearer what the clearance applies to. Okay, because again, you can have a clearance that applies to multiple doors, and you're going to want people who are doing approvals and doing requests to be able to understand what doors they are giving people the approval to use. Okay? And so you can see in this instance, when somebody selects the clearance, they're going to be able to see that name, and they're going to be able to see the doors. They'll scroll down. They'll be able to see the doors that the clearance applies to. Again, this is customer entered, and it's not mandatory, but it gives the customer a way to make the application easier to use for their people. You can set up the clearance for no approval needed, and again, this allows the clearance to be assigned manually, what I'll call old style. And you can assign door and elevator groups to a clearance also. So if a clearance supports expiring per person, that any door, iStar door, or elevator that can be assigned to this clearance must also support the expiring clearances. Okay? And you set this rule when you create the group. So once you save the group, you can't change the rule if the group gets assigned to a clearance where expiration per person is enabled. So if you set this group up to support expiring clearances and you assign it to a person with expiring clearances, you can't come back and change the group rule to no rule. Okay, now another thing that's being changed in 260 is they're going to allow more than 150 clearances per person. You can have up to 1,000 clearances per person, but that's only with ultra controllers. And you can update this system variable to change the number so that you can set up the number of clearances. And so, for example, now this says, it used to say 150, now it says the sum of the clearances and custom clearances can be no greater than 1,000. Okay, and then you need to stop and start the RStar driver to update this variable. And that's it for today now, or for this morning, I should say. So are there any questions or anything you want me to go back over?
Can we go back to the last slide?
Sure. Okay.
So you said that it's up to 1,000 clearances per person for ultras only. So how will that variable, if you set it to 1,000, how would it apply to iStar Pros and such?
Well, it's interesting. The same limits apply for the other controllers. So if you look down here, it might be a little difficult to see, but it says the minimum number of clearances, the value cannot be changed if the iStar or APC driver is running. APC supports up to 40. The older iStar support 150. And iStar Ultra supports up to 1,000. So what that means is that you can't, if you set it to 1,000, your old controllers still can't exceed 150 clearances. Okay, but your iStar Ultras will be able to support more clearances. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know how it chooses which clearances would go down to the old iStars, and I can check that out. My guess is that it's the first 150 that get downloaded, and then it stops.
It's probably based on like an object ID or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I don't know the insides of personnel fast download and how it picks out and in what order it goes. But if it was going by person, again, it would probably pick out, like you said, the first 150 clearance IDs. But I'll check that out.
Perfect.
Okay. What's our time right now anyway? Okay, 9:58. 9:58. So it really didn't take that long. Let me finish writing down this question. And if you guys think of additional questions, I'll come back to you in a second. Could you guys mute? I am getting some feedback. I don't know who that was, but okay. Okay, I'm back from writing down the question. So does anybody have any other things you want to go back through? Or you can, you could type in a question if you want. Anything else?
Hey Matt.
Yeah.
When's the unified software going to be available on the web to download for 2.6 and 4.9.1?
Sorry, could you turn your volume down a little bit? I couldn't really hear well. What was that again?
Just saying, I'm just turn it down a bit. When's the software due to be released on the web?
I'm still not getting your question.
None of us can understand that question. There's a lot of feedback on the line.
Don't know why. Hang on.
Why don't you type it in? Could you type it into the question panel?
Yep.
Or chat. There's a chat panel also.
Hey, Matt, this is the Brossard team. We're going to drop off, and we'll join back for the next session. I think it's at 1 o'clock, right?
Yeah, that'll be fine.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Perfect. Take care. No problem.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hey Matt, I just sent a question. I'm not sure if you got it. If there's too much feedback still. Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Hey Matt, Scott again. Did you get a question?
I saw you had typed in a couple of questions, and I missed them because I closed that panel. So
Okay.
I'm gonna try to answer those.
Okay, no worries. Right, okay, so not till January on the web. Right, now I'm going to go because it's 2 a.m. in the morning here. The unescorted and escorted visitors was to do with visitor passes. But you probably answered the question with the request to authorise it anyway, so that's fine.
Okay. One of the things that Scott asked was about release dates, and they're still working on that. They're in the middle of doing a lot of testing on this. There are still some bug fixes. I think we're pretty much done with features, but they want to make sure that they give this a good vetting in QA. So it looks like what we're expecting is to have QA testing done in the middle of December. And so that means it'll probably be after the first of the year when all the post-release production things get done. So that's the expectation at this point.
If you can hear me, Matt, just the escorted and unescorted visits, you probably answered via the requester approver application, because you could one of the things we have over here in Australia and New Zealand is you get that ability via going through a kiosk or something to request either escorted or unescorted visits.
Okay.
And if you're unescorted, ask access to certain doors.
Okay, let's talk about that. Now, the escort and unescorted visits that existed in Secure for quite a while are essentially totally separated from visitor management. That's you don't need visitor management in order to use those things. You can have you can set those things up without visitor management. Okay, Scott, I'm going to mute you because I was getting a little bit of feedback. But so they're really separate systems. Visitor management is used to communicate to the hosts and the visitors about visits that you've set up. Okay, and whether or not your site decides that when visitors come to the lobby, those visitors need to be escorted through doors is a matter of site policy. So let's give a for instance. You've got someone who is going to be doing, someone's an HR manager, and they're going to have 10 college graduates come in to get an intro to the company and to assess their potential for, wanting to be hired and whether or not the company would want to hire them. So they're going to go through a tour and they're going to sit down and have interviews and talk to some engineering managers and so on and so forth. So that's our scenario. So in visitor management, the HR manager or say an administrator can set up a visit and will be able to input those students' names into the database and put their email addresses in and then send them visit email to make them aware that they're going to be visiting next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Okay, now when they get there, it may be the site policy that they do not receive temporary cards to be able to go through any doors themselves. The site may basically have an escort policy, and so that HR manager or some representative is the one who is going to be escorting them and taking them through the building. So the two systems are separate, but they can be used together. Okay, Scott, does that help?
Yeah, all good. Now it's not so much it's just one of those things that you want to tick in a specification or whatever. It's not used greatly. A lot of times it's mostly escorted. The majority of times it's escorted, but just to tick a box.
Okay, so you're now what should happen is that when we do the A&E spec, that there should be coverage in there about escort and unescorted is, I believe, in there already. There should be a section on visitor management, but I don't know. It's an interesting question about what we would want to say to a customer or to an integrator about how those systems would work together. And they are not inseparably linked. In other words, you could implement one without the other. You could have both systems going. You could have some visitor management visits that were set up that used escort rules or did not use escort rules. The visitor management is designed so that it can be used with the temporary card process. So we created back in the beginning in the first version of visitor management the ability to create and assign temporary cards. But you can also use it in an instance where there aren't cards at all, or you could use it in that kind of an escorted instance where the escort would need to swipe first, and then the people with the temporary cards would need to swipe next. But yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll ask one of our local apps engineers about how that would be handled in something like an RFP.
Yeah, I think just here because of the different products we have manufactured in the region, it's a case of ticking a box. They've tried to find something in their product that's unique, but as long as you tick that box, then we get over that hurdle.
Okay, I understand what you mean.
What you just said, yes, we tick all those boxes, so that's now not an issue anymore.
Okay. All right, that's good. All right. Okay, do we have any other questions from the attendees? Anything else? All right, if not, then I'm going to let you go and hopefully see you again this afternoon. And thanks a lot for attending. And like I mentioned, what I'm going to do is send out the PowerPoints to everyone who's attended. You are free to share those amongst your group. They are internal only, but you can share them amongst your colleagues. And as soon as I have the recordings all set up, then I will send out email and tell people where the recordings are posted. All right, so thanks a lot for attending, and I'll see you this afternoon, hopefully.